All right, ready to dive into something fascinating today.
Let's do it.
Okay, so Fernanda Torres, uh, you might not immediately know that name. She just became the first Brazilian actress to win a Golden Globe. Pretty big deal.
Definitely. And it's especially interesting when you consider what she won it for. Her role in the film, I'm Still Here, which, it really dives into Brazil's past.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about this film, but fill me in. What's the story?
So it tells the story of Eunice Paiva. She spent over 2 decades fighting to figure out what happened to her husband after he disappeared during Brazil's military dictatorship.
Oh, wow. That's a long time to be searching for answers. What happened to him?
Well, her husband, Rubens Paiva, was a congressman, and he openly opposed the regime, and in 1971 he was kidnapped and murdered. Sadly, he was only one of many victims during that time. But the film does something pretty remarkable. It doesn't just tell us the facts, it goes much deeper than that.
I see. So how does it do that?
Well, I'm Still Here is based on a memoir written by Eunice and Rubens' son, Marcelo. So it brings this whole other layer to the story. You see this family dealing with a horrible loss. And at the same time, you see the nation wrestling with its past.
Wow, that's powerful. And it's interesting because the film came out during a really tense time in Brazil, politically speaking, right?
Yeah. Think back to 2022. That's when the news broke about a planned coup by Bolsonaro allies. You can't help but see the connections to the dictatorship era.
That's right. And Bolsonaro hasn't exactly been quiet about his, let's say, admiration for the dictatorship.
Right. So with that context, the film's release became even more significant. It spurred some really important conversations all over the country.
It makes you think about the role of art. Torres wins this award, the film gets all this attention, and it feels like it forces a nation to confront its own reflection.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. There's a historian, Luis Felipe de Alan Castro, and he noticed something pretty remarkable after the film came out. Daughters of former political prisoners started sharing their family stories online. It was something older generations wouldn't have even considered.
That's pretty amazing. It sounds like the film helped break down some serious barriers, and it got people talking about things that maybe were swept under the rug for too long.
Exactly. And here's something else that's interesting. The film wasn't just embraced by one side of the political spectrum. Even Fernanda Torres talked about how I'm Still Here connected with Brazilians across political lines. There was something about the Paiva family's story that resonated with everyone.
It's like a shared human experience transcending the politics.
Right.
So we have this deeply personal story. It gets made into a film, then it wins a major award, and now it's sparking conversations on a global scale.
Yeah.
It's remarkable what art can achieve.
Absolutely. And we'll delve even deeper into I'm Still Here as we go along. But even now, we can see how art can be this incredible force. It pushes us to look at history, to understand what it means for us today.
Okay, so we've set the stage. We've introduced the key players. But now let's really get into the details. How did I'm Still Here actually portray the brutality of the dictatorship? How did it weave Eunice's story into that larger political context?
Well, one of the most striking things about the film is how it shows just how far the dictatorship's reach extended. It wasn't just limited to those directly involved in politics. The fear, the repression, it seeped into every aspect of daily life.
I can only imagine. So what were some of the tactics the regime used to maintain that control?
Well, think about censorship. Artists, journalists, really anyone perceived as a threat, they faced serious consequences. Then there was the constant surveillance. Families like the Paivas were always being watched. Living under that kind of threat changes everything. And of course, there were the disappearances, thousands of them, just gone with no explanation.
It's chilling. Rubens Paiva's story is just one of so many. But the film puts a human face on it. It reminds us that these aren't just statistics. These were real people with families and lives that were torn apart.
And the film doesn't shy away from those tough questions either. Like, can a country truly move on if it hasn't fully acknowledged its past? Can there be real progress without addressing those lingering shadows?
That's a heavy question, but one that's important to ask, not just in Brazil, but everywhere. I'm Still Here reminds us what's at stake when democracy starts to erode. But how did the film go about weaving Eunice's personal journey together with this broader historical context?
Well, they did something really clever in the film. They contrasted the Paiva family's life before the dictatorship with the stark reality that followed. You see them in Rio enjoying their home, having parties. It's all about intellectual freedom, just really living.
And then it all changes.
Exactly. And that contrast makes the disruption caused by the regime that much more stark. It also allows us to connect with Eunice on a human level. We see her strength not as something extraordinary, but as a mother desperately searching for answers, fighting for justice for her husband.
It makes the struggle feel real, relatable. It's not just about abstract or political ideals. It's about the impact on real people's lives.
That's it, exactly. And it's not like the film portrays Eunice as some flawless hero either. We see her flaws, her internal struggles, which makes her even more relatable. Her resilience isn't about perfection, it's about keeping going despite the pain and uncertainty.
It's a reminder that courage can look different for everyone, that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to be silenced, refusing to let the past disappear.
You got it.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Eunice's story so powerful. It shows how personal stories can reflect larger societal struggles. In this case, it's Brazil grappling with its past.
It brings those events to life, makes them feel less distant and more, well, real. But the film doesn't just focus on the past, right? There are some uncomfortable parallels to what's happening in Brazil today, especially with the rise of the far right.
You're absolutely right. And both Fernanda Torres and the film's director, Walter Salles, have talked about those parallels. They've pointed out how Bolsonaro openly admires the dictatorship. And with his allies trying to weaken democratic institutions, it feels like those same threats are resurfacing.
It's like a reminder that democracy is always a work in progress. You can't take it for granted.
Exactly. And that's where I'm Still Here goes beyond just a story about Brazil's past. It becomes a cautionary tale. It reminds us that we have to learn from history, we have to remember it, or else we're doomed to repeat those same mistakes.
That brings us to the film's global impact. Torres winning that Golden Globes put this story on the international stage. It's not just a Brazilian story anymore, it's a human story that speaks to everyone.
You said it. It brings international attention to this chapter in Brazilian history. And it's likely a lot of people outside of Brazil haven't really heard about it before.
So it's not just about raising awareness within Brazil, it's about helping the world understand the dangers of authoritarianism. It reminds us that protecting democratic values is important everywhere, not just in one country.
That's the key point. And, it makes you wonder about the ripple effects. This film, this story, could push people to look at their own countries, at their own political situations. Are they seeing similar things happening? Are there warning signs that people are overlooking?
It encourages people to look inward, but also to consider the bigger picture, the rise of authoritarianism around the world. We're seeing those same patterns emerging in so many places.
That's true. And that's why I'm Still Here, even though it's rooted in this specific time and place, feels so relevant right now. It's a reminder that we can't be complacent. We have to fight for democracy, and that means being vigilant, and it means each of us actively participating.
Okay, so we've discussed the film's impact on both a national and global level. But what about the film itself? How does it use storytelling to bring this challenging part of history to life?
Well, one thing the film does really well is blend the personal and the political. It doesn't hold back on showing the brutality of the dictatorship, but it does it through Eunice's eyes. So it makes these political events feel very personal, very relatable.
Right, it's not just about facts and figures. It's about the emotional reality of living under that kind of regime.
Exactly. We see how the dictatorship impacts Eunice's family, their relationships, their sense of safety, even their identities. And that's what gives the film its power. It doesn't just inform you about things, it helps you understand, it evokes empathy.
You mentioned empathy. I'm curious, how does I'm Still Here achieve that connection with the audience?
They use some interesting techniques, like there's a lot of intimate camera work. They often use close-ups, so you see Eunice's pain, her strength right there in front of you. It makes you feel like you're right there with her, experiencing it alongside her.
So it draws the audience in, lets them feel the story, not just observe it.
Precisely. And then there's the pacing. The film doesn't rush things. It lets those quiet moments, those reflective moments, really sink in. It gives you time to process the weight of what's happening.
It creates a sense of shared experience, shared grief, shared reflection. But it's not all gloom and doom, right? The film also shows moments of joy, moments of connection, even moments of resistance in the face of all that darkness.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
The film doesn't try to romanticize things. It shows the complexity of being human, even in a time of oppression. You see those moments of laughter, moments of love, moments where people stand up for what they believe in. It reminds you that even when things are at their darkest, the human spirit can endure, and it can find meaning.
It makes the story feel more real, more authentic.
I agree. And those moments of light make the darkness stand out even more. The contrast makes both the beauty and the brutality that much more powerful.
It's remarkable how they strike that balance in the film. They don't shy away from the horrors of the dictatorship, but they also acknowledge the resilience of the human spirit. It's about learning from the past, but also finding hope for the future.
And that message resonates so strongly, especially now when democracy feels vulnerable in so many parts of the world. I'm still here, reminds us that we can't just sit back and watch. We have to be active in protecting our freedoms, in speaking out against injustice, and holding those in power accountable.
It's a call to action, plain and simple.
Absolutely. And it's a call that speaks to people everywhere, not just in Brazil.
Okay, we've talked about the film's impact, how well made it is, and how it started important conversations and really touched people. But I keep coming back to this question. Can a film really help a country face its darkest moments?
It's a question we all wrestle with. And while there's no easy answer, I'm Still Here offers a glimmer of hope.
It feels like this film, I'm Still Here, is doing something really important. It's not just telling us a story. It's almost like giving us a blueprint for how to deal with those really difficult truths, both individually and as a society.
Right, and it shows just how powerful art can be in that process. It creates a space for thinking, for talking to each other, for healing. It can challenge the way we see things, help us understand other people's experiences.
That makes me think about something we haven't really touched on yet. We've talked about the film's impact on Brazil and the world, and about how well made it is, and all those conversations that started. But what about the Paiva family themselves? I mean, how did they feel about seeing their story up on the big screen?
That's a great question, and it brings up some really important ethical considerations when you're telling real-life stories, especially ones that involve so much pain and loss. From what I've read, the Paiva family, especially Marcelo, was really involved in making the film. They saw it as a way to honor Rubens, to make sure his story wasn't forgotten.
I can imagine it was probably a really cathartic experience for them, to have their story told with so much sensitivity and respect.
I'm sure it was a roller coaster of emotions. It must have been painful to relive those events. But at the same time, maybe there was a sense of empowerment, seeing their family's strength recognized, and seeing their fight for justice being shared with the world.
And it goes beyond just their personal experience, right?
Yeah.
By sharing their story, they've contributed to this much bigger conversation about Brazil's past, and maybe even how the country moves forward.
Exactly. And that's what's so extraordinary about I'm Still Here. It starts with this one family story, but then it touches on all these bigger ideas. National identity, holding people in power accountable, and the importance of truth and remembering.
It really shows how personal stories can have a huge impact, even on a political and social level.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that we all have a responsibility to listen to those stories, especially the stories of people who have been silenced or marginalized. We have to learn from what they've been through and work towards the future where those kinds of injustices don't happen again.
So where do we go from here? What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into I'm Still Here?
Well, if I had to pick one, it's that the fight for democracy never ends. We always have to be vigilant, we have to participate, and we have to be brave enough to speak truth to power.
And I'm Still Here really is a call to action, isn't it?
Uh,
It reminds us that we can't afford to just sit back and watch. We have to learn from history, understand how it affects us now, and actively work towards a better future.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And it underscores the importance of art in that process. Art can get people talking, help us understand each other, and challenge the way things are. It can change hearts and minds and inspire real action.
I'm Still Here is a perfect example of that. It's touched so many people, both in Brazil and around the world. It's got people thinking, talking, and recommitting themselves to the fight for democracy.
It's a testament to the bravery of the Paiva family for sharing their story, and to the power of art to shine a light on the darkest parts of history that we often try to forget.
So what do we want our listeners to do after this deep dive?
First of all, watch the film, experience I'm Still Here for yourselves. Let it spark some of those important internal conversations.
And then take it a step further. Use this as a starting point to learn more about Brazil's history. Look for those connections between the past and what's happening today, and think about what it means for your own community, your own country.
This fight for democracy, it's happening everywhere. And it's up to all of us to stay informed, to get involved, and to be active participants. Let's honor the memory of Eunice Paiva, Rubens Paiva, and everyone who has fought for justice and freedom by continuing their fight every single day.